Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Wednesday. So what does that mean for all of us? It's Wednesday. Yeah, Wednesday, March 9th. Does that clear things up for you? March 9th, 2022. Time for another show. Greg Dworkin already loading up the raft stories, heading on down the river. I guess that's what happens with rafts. And we're ready to roll. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. I know this because Bill thinks it's ready. And when Bill thinks it's ready, it's ready. Cake's done, everybody. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Loves the nightlife. He loves to boogie. On the disco round, oh yeah. Now the song's in my head, all right. The strings are coming up. All right, way to go, Bill. But not now, numbskull. He's broadcasting. True, I can only do so much dancing while hooked up to the headphones. I could get wireless headphones. I don't think they'd work very well with the broadcast. But anyway, time to roll today. Sad news reaches us. You can hear how sad I am. I'm all broken up about it. I am. I'm a little, it's a little bit of a bummer. Charles Entenmann, 92 years young and still delicious, except now dead, I guess. But Charles Entenmann, founder of the Entenmann's Baked Goods Empire, which I guess I thought Charles Entenmann might have been a guy who perhaps died at the age of 92 back in, I don't know, the 70s or something. Like he was this ancient patriarch, but a more recent phenomenon than I believe. But I guess probably kids of the 70s, 80s, and later would have grown up, at least on the East Coast of the United States. I don't know whether it was a nationally distributed chain, but very heavily East Coast, North Atlantic area, Mid-Atlantic area, I guess, for many years. So all the delicious treats, which I guess will still keep going because I don't think he was baking them when he was 92 years old. But if so, well, then we're all in for a loss. And everybody out there sharing pictures of their favorite products, some still made, some discontinued. They had an amazing array of products. And if you missed out on the Entenmann's phenomenon, I don't know, head to the store and see if they've got any in the bakery. I don't know the bakery section per se, but the cookies. And, you know, they have aisle end caps usually. Good chocolate chip cookies, very nice. Lots of people swear by cakes that I haven't seen on the shelves for years, but Devil's Food Cake with a marshmallow frosting, apparently a favorite for a lot of people. Crumb cake donuts, all sorts of good stuff. And, raise a plate, I guess, to Charles Entenmann. We'll see whether that makes a dent in Greg's life today. Lots of other things happening today. I guess sad sack Dave Lanhart is crying again about people had to wear masks, and there are so many problems from masks and something. I don't know. He's got an article out there today that's annoying people because he's, I don't know. He's not selling masking hard enough, I guess, but whatever. I don't know. This has bothered him for some time now. But at least he's not anti-vaccine or anything like that. He's just got an article that says, well, in his opinion, it's the vaccine that does the most. And it is, but I guess his point of view is that masking just hasn't done enough. And his evidence, apparently, I haven't read the whole thing. And I don't think we're going to, but maybe Greg will explain it. Maybe not. Might not be that important an article. But a lot of people complaining about it because it was annoying because he's talking about masking not being that effective. But he's talking about Omicron, which, you know, was just super infectious, and it was difficult to get people to mask up properly. I mean, we made the switch from cloth masks to the N95 masks, and that was helpful and effective. I don't know. Overall, I'd say we've done pretty good. I mean, it's still the case that only about 28% of the country have officially reported having become infected with coronavirus at any time. So, I don't know. I keep seeing people tweeting out, do you know anybody, like as if there were no one out there, do you know anybody, I assume it's trolling, who has been triple vaxxed and hasn't caught the virus? And I was like, yeah, everybody, I guess, who's been triple, I don't know. I mean, there's plenty of people who have been fully vaccinated and got their booster, and that's what fully vaccinated means at this point, and contracted the Omicron variant at some point. It happened, and it happened to a lot of people. But the vast majority of the country so far, according to the statistics, and there are many people who may have caught some version of COVID and been asymptomatic and therefore never tested and therefore never reported. But, by the numbers, the vast majority of the country never got it. So that's why they're running around. Part of the country is still running around saying it's still a hoax because they never had it. I don't know. Anyway, I should get off the subject because I didn't read the article and I don't want to. But a lot of people complaining about it this morning. So I'm voicing your complaints. That and the part about not being able to get the cookies and cakes you want anymore. All right. Good morning, Greg. How are you doing? What's
I'm
up
doing
on
okay.
the Rafto stories?
Actually, both the complaints and the article are overblown. Both
Okay. Excellent. And I can fix it by not reading it.
It's a basic concept here.
Okay.
All right. Absence of evidence, therefore, means that there's evidence of absence.
Oh, well, it's evidence that the evidence is absent.
If you can't really be sure, then whatever I thought before must be right.
I guess
that's basically Dave Leonhardt's
He's just so
entire
sad about
approach to information.
Yeah, I don't know. He doesn't get me so angry so much as I just think he's like, all of a sudden he's this weird sad sack about masks. Like, what's the problem?
Well, but he didn't even go quite that far.
Okay.
What he points out is this. During the Omicron wave, schools in heavily Democratic areas were more likely to close some classrooms or require that students stay home for extended periods.
Yeah. If you make it a Democratic
and mask wearing
thing,
remains more common in liberal communities than conservative ones.
Fine.
Okay. And given that those are differences, did Omicron spread less in parts of the U.S. where social distancing and masking were more common? And the answer is unclear.
Social distancing ended a year and a half ago.
Because it's unclear, whatever I thought before must be correct.
I guess so. I don't know. Yeah.
And there's your absence
That's the problem.
of evidence.
All right.
It's just not so clear. On the other hand, it may well be that, especially if you're talking about pre-Omicron, that a lot of the school closures probably weren't as necessary and weren't as smart, and deep cleaning wasn't as smart as getting better ventilation in the schools, which is unclear in terms of whether or not people who got money actually spent the money doing something useful.
Well, we should take a survey of that and see how many people did that. By the way, if you were going to improve the ventilation in your schools, you would have to close while you did it. I just will point that out. You might as well use the excuse of it also will help stop the spread. But yeah, there was certainly a lot of money wasted. So his piece is,
look, vaccines clearly made a difference, but it's not so clear about the other stuff. And, of course, there's a lot of confounding factors in the other stuff.
Yes, including
the other stuff includes things like, some people complied, some people didn't.
Right.
It was done at different times. It was done with different variants. And it takes a while to collect all of that information and put it in a form that you can actually interpret.
Yes, but it only takes 20 minutes to write an article. So
exactly. So Greg Gonsalves, who is a AIDS expert and a epidemiologist working on Yale, and he writes, Dave Leonhardt's NPIs don't work column today is just David re-expressing his prior beliefs. In fact, there's data to suggest NPIs like masking do work. David's brand is he was the smartest guy in his class at Yale, and now he's the smartest guy at New York Times. But if he took any of a number of causal inference classes, he would get an F. Really tired of him assuming knowledge he doesn't have, and then seeking experts confirming his bias. And this matters. He has influence on policy makers and a set of educated readers who trust his invocation of data and analysis. But the work is shoddy.
Yeah. Well,
and that's a problem. So, we don't know yet. And it's the whole debate about, Florida does everything wrong and California does everything right, but people still got sick in California. Okay.
Yeah,
at the same rate? Did they have the same age differences? Where are you looking? What are you looking at? Are you looking at whether or not you got infected, or are you looking at whether or not you wound up in the hospital? Are you looking at whether you died? Or are you looking at,
I didn't die.
Something else altogether? And unless you make all that stuff clear, and it's really difficult to collect that data, especially in places like Florida that doesn't give it to you, then how do you know?
I don't know. But all I can tell you is I have never talked to Dave Leonhardt face-to-face in my entire life, masked or unmasked, and he's got no problem communicating. I can't stop the guy.
Well, there is no question that things are better now than they were a month ago.
Yes.
There's also no question we don't know what happens next month.
New
New
variants,
variants,
no question. That's true.
Variant, son of variant,
yes, right.
variant junior. We don't know.
No,
The
I
idea
hope
that,
there's nothing.
none of this makes a difference is not supported by the data. And it's also, bad public health.
Mm-hmm.
But communicating that you don't know what's going to happen next is good public health. And saying, well, it's really clear to me that my biases are the correct ones. It's just plain bad.
Yes, well, all
But,
right.
that makes you a pundit. You get paid to express your opinion.
Right?
I get that.
I mean,
And
there's
I don't want
other
to cancel
sad
you.
things.
I'm just pointing out that, have some humility because a lot of the stuff you said was wrong, but of course you don't have to, do that. Tom Friedman talking about what's going to happen in Ukraine.
But at least that's his beat.
Yeah, it's his beat, but, we'll know more in 6 months, right?
We don't have to listen to him anymore. But Dave Leonhardt, okay. There's other things to be
and
said
people
about
now
right?
know not to take Tom Friedman that seriously.
Yeah.
They don't call him Secretary of State Friedman anymore.
That's what we'll have to do with Dave, I guess. But okay.
Right. CDC Director Leonhardt has decided whether or not masks work.
Well,
not so simple.
Yeah. All right. Ukraine, baseball, the return of the Masked Singer. You could cry about any of those things.
Yeah, but he's right that there's not as much definitive data as we would like. And to me,
don't write.
Rather than lead to the conclusion that masks don't work, it leads me to the conclusion that CDC and HHS need some major reforms.
You could do that. That would be like policy based and everything.
Yeah.
You sound
let's
smart.
get, you don't have the data. Let's set it up so you have better data. How come other countries have that data?
Yeah. I don't know.
Talk to them. Because Ron DeSantis is running for president, so he doesn't want anything making Florida look bad, so you can't get data.
Yes. Well, that's going to be... one day we'll find out all about that and everything that was suppressed, but probably not until it's too late.
Anyway, so it's Wednesday. Let's take a tour of the world.
Yes, please. Ukraine.
The war, and it is a war.
Yes.
In Ukraine,
right.
And it is Ukraine, not the Ukraine.
Right. Yes.
Still goes on, and things are basically where they were the other day. There's a very, very nice little chain of summary tweets that's from a very good reporter, Tim Mack, who's working for NPR right now.
Yeah.
And is in Ukraine.
Right. Be careful.
I can give you an idea of what's going on here. And so let's look at those. I got to find them here because Skype has decided it wants to hide all of this stuff I sent you this morning.
Yeah. Okay.
But here's the Ukraine update thread.
Okay,
it was the first thing I sent to you this morning. Morning to everybody who finds this. Kyiv remains in Ukrainian hands.
Yes.
That's perhaps the most important information.
Those are the hands we want.
Troubling signs overnight at the Chernobyl nuclear site, which lost power at 11:22 a.m. local time. The decommissioned site is controlled by Russian forces. Before we get deep into the details, I want to pump the brakes a little about what this means, or what could mean. A second meltdown, Chernobyl-sized disaster 2.0, is not in the cards. An emergency would likely take some time to develop, if it happens at all. Emergency generators are continuing to provide power to critical systems, but repair to local transmission lines is made impossible by combat, and generators have 48 hours of fuel. No. So the IAEA, the International Regulatory Agency that inspects Iran, among other things, has warned it's concerned about Chernobyl, where hundreds of personnel have been forced to work for 2 weeks straight without relief. And they also said it lost radiation monitoring data from the site. Okay, so beware misleading claims about old spent fuel cooling needs. The spent fuel rods are at a minimum 22 years old. They have very little heat to dissipate. In most plants, spent fuel that is more than 5 years old sits in dry storage, cooled easily by air. Just, put things in perspective.
Okay.
So,
I guess.
We have a situation where the Russian army isn't that competent, but it's big. It can do a lot of destruction and will. It's not advancing the way it intended. Putin was wrong about everything he assumed when he went to war. The Russian army is still large enough to do damage, so it may not look like he's losing, but he's losing, and everybody in the world knows it, including him, and that's bad. So Business Week, Bloomberg Business Week points out Putin's endgame starts to look like reducing Ukraine to rubble. The Russian president envisioned a quick victory. If his history is any guide, destruction may be his fallback plan, and in other words, they're looking not at Crimea when he took it, but rather Chechnya.
Yes.
In 1994. You can't win? Well, just destroy the country.
Yeah, well, that's his one model, I guess, but yeah, it's a different kind of a place for sure, but I don't know if he cares.
Right? So
that's
when the fighting in Chechnya ended, Putin installed a warlord there, you may recall.
Sure. Big on warlords.
The father of incumbent Ramzan Kadyrov, granting them wide autonomy to rule Chechens as they saw fit. And units of the Chechen leader's private militia have been fighting near Kyiv, according to Ukraine's armed forces. It's one of the groups sent to try to assassinate Zelensky, according to them.
Oh, yeah.
But it's hard to see how the model can be transposed, because Ukraine's so much larger. No one lord or militia could control it. Right? And so it's really difficult to see what happens next, but just destroying the place seems like a good way to, get rid of all of his annoyance.
I guess, except it'll just leave Russia isolated
he's
forever.
a 6-year-old who lost, the board game and just ups the board game and throws everything on the floor and stomps out of the room.
Yeah. Well,
and you could say it's wrong, and you could say it's childish, and
Yeah,
the fact of the matter is that the board game is scattered all over the floor.
Yeah, it could be, certainly. I mean, I guess all we have to pin our hopes to is, the sad fact that, although allegedly American diplomats of the Trump era were certain that no one cared about Ukraine, I think that you probably could have gotten away with that statement a little easier if you were talking about Chechnya.
J.D. Vance was convinced, and Tucker Carlson was convinced, and they've unconvinced themselves now.
Yeah, right.
But don't forget, it's a two-front war.
Not true.
So on the ground, Russia's having trouble, but still doing the destruction thing. Yeah, and in the economic areas, Russia's getting clobbered.
Yeah.
So the question is, what comes first? The collapse of the Russian army, the collapse of the Russian ruble. Well, the Russian ruble comes first. And so what happens after that? And that's the part that's not so clear. Here's an explainer from AP today. What does a U.S. ban on Russian oil accomplish? Well, it accomplishes a lot domestically in the political front, because it makes it look like you're doing something.
Oh, yes. Okay.
And you look strong, which is an explanation for why when Biden says, okay, we're going to restrict oil from Russia, the Republicans say that's because you're weak. Because black is white and up is down to them.
Makes you look strong, so we'll tell you you're weak. Okay.
Right, exactly.
Got it.
With Russia intensifying its war in Ukraine, killing civilians and triggering a mass refugee crisis, Biden on Tuesday announced the U.S. ban on imported Russian oil. Critics of Russia have said that sanctioning its energy exports would be the best and only way to force Moscow to pull back. A full embargo would be most effective if it included European allies, but it's far from clear that all of Europe would take part in an embargo. And that's because parts of Europe, including Germany, are very dependent upon Russian oil. So it's easy for the U.S., which, I guess 8% of our oil is imported from Russia, hardly any. You could cut that off and make it up from reserves.
Yes.
But Europe is not in that kind of situation. We could export liquefied natural gas, LNG, but we're at full capacity in terms of sending. So not so easy to do. And the Brits have said, okay, we're going to divest ourselves of Russian oil by the end of the year. Germany says, we don't know what we're going to do yet.
Yeah, that would be I guess they're probably the biggest consumers.
Right. And so you're not going to get all of Europe doing the same thing at the same time. And the fascinating part of that is look how the rest of this has played out, whether it's SWIFT and whether it's everything else. It looks like the United States has organized Europe and the U.S. to do everything in concert, with Europe going first about everything, making Biden look like he's not doing anything when, in fact, he's doing everything.
Like asking the Europeans.
But on this
difficult,
organizing.
Yeah.
Remember, Republicans don't respect and understand organizing. Remember what they used to say about Obama. But
right.
The thing is that it's not so easy to do that with oil because Europe is so dependent on it. So now you have a situation where it's not the case that Europe and the U.S. are completely in lockstep. They can't be. And so here the U.S. is going to take the lead, and parts of Europe will follow, and others won't. Mm-hmm. And that itself will make a difference, but it's not going to be the same united front because it can't be. At the same time, Any curbs on Russian oil exports, says this explainer, could send already skyrocketing oil and gas prices even higher on both continents and further squeeze consumers. So, there's reasons to not be totally hard-nosed about it. And yet Biden did it anyway.
Yeah.
That's because he's weak.
Oh, well.
According to Republicans.
Yeah, sure. The 8% that we import, I don't even know if we refine it into petroleum, but by most reports, it shouldn't have a gigantic effect on gas prices. But like with many consumer prices lately, the widespread knowledge that inflation is high is sometimes masking the ability to just take advantage of the situation and say, well, why don't we increase our prices and point to that thing everyone's been reading about in the newspaper, even if it doesn't have anything to do with it.
Right. It's just that whatever Russia sells to the U.S., which is now not selling to the U.S., has to be sold somewhere else.
Yeah.
And if it's sold somewhere else, that drops the price of oil everywhere because people like China and India, as we talked about on Monday, if they want to buy Russian oil, they could say, okay, but I'm going to pay a third of what you were asking for, and who else are you going to sell it to?
And Europe can do it too.
So if Russia were eventually shut off in the global market, rogue countries such as Iran and Venezuela might be welcome back. And that will bring up a whole bunch of other stuff in terms of, oh, look, he's weak. Now he's turning to Venezuela. Well, actually, we're moderating the gas prices everywhere and doing what needs to be done to keep the world economy going so we don't go into recession, which is a smart thing to do. Well, I don't care if it's smart. It's weak.
Yes.
Because everything he does is weak. Everything.
Right.
It doesn't matter what he does.
Well,
he can lift 10,000 pounds with his finger and it's still weak because we say so.
Not 20,000.
So you have to be prepared for that sort of stuff. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
It's meaningless. It's noise. And the question is whether or not what Biden's doing is actually going to turn out to be effective. Now, a team of Biden administration officials were in Venezuela over the weekend.
Okay.
And
how's the weather?
News of the oil ban sent gasoline prices surging. But the U.S. oil industry has said it shares the goal of reducing reliance on foreign energy sources and is committed to working with the Biden administration and Congress. And even without sanctions, some U.S. refiners have severed contracts with Russian companies. Okay. And imports of Russian crude is already tumbling. So the imports of Russian crude dropped to zero in the last week in February, for example.
All right. I mean, that was without the ban.
Right. So while U.S. oil and gas producers could drill for more natural gas, its export facilities are already operating capacity. Expanding facilities would take years and billions of dollars. So it's a complicated jigsaw puzzle here with lots of different pieces, all of them moving, and you're trying to assemble it into a coherent response, and it'll be semi-coherent, but it's not going to be instantaneous. It's going to hurt Russia. And the question is, of course, how much, just as all the sanctions that are being done are going to hurt Russia, and the question is going to be how much. So now, as we go through the next couple of days and weeks, we have to appreciate the fact that none of this, the war in Ukraine, the effects on Russia, the effects on Putin, none of this is going to be instantaneous. It's going to take weeks, not days. And while that happens, all sorts of other stuff is happening. The U.S. passed postal reform. They actually decided to fund the government through the fiscal year through September, and part of that was aid to Ukraine. And some of that's going to be military, and some of that will reach them. They're still negotiating with Poland over whether or not to give them planes. They had a scheme to do that. Right. Poland couldn't give Ukraine planes directly. They could fly them to Ramstein in Germany, and then from there they were going to go to Ukraine, so Poland wouldn't be directly involved.
Yeah, well.
But whether or not that makes any sense or doesn't make any sense, you still have the situation of trying to set up something that helps the Ukrainians without it being an overt act of war with a nutter dictator who has 6,000 nuclear weapons.
Yes. And, it's not that nuts to say, I know where those planes came from. I'm going to consider them to be Polish
they're Soviet planes.
I mean, that's true, too. Originally, they're MiG planes.
I know exactly where they came from. They came from the USSR.
Yeah. Well, there you go. And that's a good point, too. You leaked these things, Vladimir. It's not my problem.
We don't make Soviet planes.
Right. I mean, they're MiGs. I thought that was interesting, too, that the plan was to drop them at the air base. As somebody said, leave the keys, in the in the glove
Yeah,
box.
leave the plane
or
running.
whatever. Yeah,
Just,
and we'll
I'm going to go in and get a cup of coffee. Oh, my
Yeah.
goodness, the plane is gone.
And then, of course, right, yeah, like, does anybody, by the way, anybody know how to fly a MiG? I mean, I guess you could probably make it work, right?
Well, that's the reason why they're not getting stealth fighters, and U.S. Stuff. You can't just all of a sudden expect that when you've been using Soviet material, that all of a sudden you know how to fly American planes.
Yeah, I guess not. So, but also
that's something that
backseat
generals think, but actual real pilots don't think that.
Yeah,
you have to fly the stuff you're trained to fly. So you have to replace it with the same sort of equipment.
But you have to close the Top Gun school and get those guys who can fly the MiGs. All right. So anyway, I've seen the movies. Hey, we can do it.
Yeah. Anyway, so
it's an unusual plane.
It's going to be an Argo style. Speaking of movies, it's going to be an Argo style scheme to get the planes there. It's not clear it's a good idea. The reason is that whereas it's great to have a beefed up Ukrainian Air Force, you really don't want to go to war with a nuclear power.
Right. Also bad. And it all counts on them saying, I didn't see in the newspaper that you flew your planes to Germany. Okay. I don't know. Somehow they thought it was going to work.
As we'd like to say on the internet, I did not see those planes.
It seems to be...
Because not seeing is all about what's going on in Ukraine.
Right. Well, it's a thing, and I don't know whether they're calling that plan off now or whether it was never the plan. It's not clear that
still
that
negotiating.
Was
None of it is clear. So what we need is a Dave Leonard column to explain what's really going on. Because his previous opinion on it, whatever it is the thing that should drive the column.
There you go. In order just to be consistent. And I do understand that actually his last big annoying column was about, oh, by the way, I know how to have fixed Ukraine, and I could have avoided the whole thing. And I didn't realize that was him, too. He's got an answer for everything. Boy, oh boy. Everyone should just read the New York Times, and there'd be no problems. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got the answers to everything if we just read the New York Times, but we'll just answer a few of the big problems at a time and solve them thoroughly for you in the next couple of minutes. Greg's got a big lineup of more news besides
small lineup of some more news.
Say small lineup of some news. That's
we'll do local stuff here. I mean, you can't solve the big problems. We're not Dave Leonard, so we can't solve the big problems of the pandemic and the war. No. But again, remember, Ukraine and Russia are all part of the picture of what's happening in regard to January 6th and other things.
Yes, right.
So Guy Reffitt,
yeah.
Guy Reffitt, however he pronounces his name, first January 6th rioter to go to trial instead of just saying, yeah, I'm guilty. He said, no, I'm going to fight this.
Good.
He was the guy who threatened his kids with shooting them if they turned him in. So, of course, they turned him in and said he's threatening to shoot us. So that just made it worse. Guy Reffitt, first January 6th rioter to go to trial, found guilty on all counts. The first capital defendant to take his case to trial was convicted of 5 charges. The thing that's most interesting to me about this, and he's the Texas guy who tried to storm the U.S. Capitol while armed with a gun and zip ties.
Yeah,
one of the zip tie guys was convicted of all 5 counts, including transport of a firearm in support of a civil disorder, or as the Canadians would say, making mischief.
Yes,
and obstruction of an official proceeding, And the thing that I found interesting is this: the jury met for barely 2 hours before it informed the judge it had reached a verdict.
They didn't even stick around for the free Panera sandwiches.
So for all of you, well, I think I'll hold on and I'll take my chance at trial. Okay, well, everybody else is getting convicted, and right away.
Yeah.
Is that really what you want, or might you want to just cooperate a little? I mean, it's up to you.
That one was easy.
I don't want to influence you in any way, shape, or form, but this guy's going up the river for a long time, and
Good.
he really lost badly. So what was it you were saying?
I don't know.
You want to fight this in court, is what you're saying?
Oh, me? Yes. I would like
Pay me
to
a lot of money to defend you. You're going to lose.
Okay.
You still want to do this?
I noticed the lawyer is well masked in this courtroom sketch. He's got a good top and bottom fastening KN95 going. And
those are the courts that you're not allowed to take pictures in, right?
I guess so.
So they have the
still
artists
have
doing the
those.
sketches. I always wondered why the artists didn't exaggerate stuff, like make the mask 50 times bigger than it was, and make the guys, do
cartoonist thing, right? Caricatures.
Put Ninas in them, do all the interesting stuff that you could do with pictures.
Right, I'd make have crazy eyes and stuff, but all right. Well, everybody go to trial because it's fun. A lot of these guys are convinced that. Remember, they believe that a jury of their peers would acquit them because they're patriots, or at least that's the story, and that's the story that the big insurrectionist is going to stick with. I believed that the election had been stolen, and I believed that the American people totally supported me, except for every one of them that I called to find me some votes for some reason. They were all against me. That seems kind of odd. All right, well, that's good news and a big conviction, and it follows up the guilty plea on sedition charges for one of the Oath Keepers. So it is worth noting that it's beginning to look more like, oh, there really is a tight-lipped and tightly coordinated plan at DOJ to bring people to justice, and they're not really telling us everything that they're doing. And just to throw in there, for instance, that they arrested one of the big Proud Boys leaders the other day. Tario, I think, is the one that they arrested, and he had apparently no idea that it was coming, and was in his underwear when he was arrested. And,
right,
well, he
and
may
that's
be
for
in his underwear all the
conspiracy.
time.
And so if you can't tell a proud...
Oops, I lost Greg. I think he was trying to send me a story and then hit the kill switch instead. All right, let's see if we can try that again. Unless they lost all power. I would have... Here we go. Okay. Well, let's see. You still there now?
The Proud there.
Yeah,
So if you can't
Proud
tell a
Boys
Proud
got
Boy
here.
from an Oath Keeper, I advise reading Marcy Wheeler because she'll straighten you out on all of that.
Right.
But clearly they're in trouble for
More or
all
less
that.
the
By the way,
same,
speaking of court artists,
Court artists.
the
Okay.
ones who sketch the art, I've always been a huge fan of a political cartoonist. And this goes back to the days of when I was growing up with Herb Black, at the Washington Post doing all the Nixon stuff. As well as, he always had a nuclear bomb as one of his major characters. Speaking nuclear bomb.
Oh, hello, Mom.
Who he could caption.
Yeah.
But just the other day was the anniversary of Bloody Sunday. And Mike Lukovich has a very famous editorial cartoon. You may have all seen it. John Lewis bridging two cliffs, allowing people to walk over him as a bridge so that they could get to vote. I just sent you a picture of it.
Yes, I see.
And on the anniversary, the day after the anniversary, it was a Monday, and the anniversary was Bloody Sunday. So I tweeted, forgive me for thinking this is Mike Lukovich's finest piece, but I think it is among many. And
Yes.
Michael the Adder, who's a current Washington Post political cartoonist, who used to work for a lot of Canadian papers, said, well, that's one of the best editorial cartoons I've ever seen, so you're forgiven for thinking
good.
that.
Well, all right. At least you're forgiven.
Yeah,
I don't know the need
by a
of
subject
forgiveness,
matter
but it's
expert.
Good.
So,
That's nice.
it's important to recognize the artists and what they bring to our political discourse here, because they actually bring quite a lot.
Yeah.
So,
All right.
Appreciate those artists in court making up for the fact that photographers aren't always allowed to, practice their craft.
Yes. Practice their love.
And
Former
you
president
learn a
once
lot
said.
from looking at those pictures. But of course, the fact that people are masked, again, as you said, it's probably not
Yeah.
Dave Lenhart in the picture.
Defendant not masked, obviously, but his attorney is. His attorney doesn't believe this crap.
Right. Two other things in terms of how Trump is doing these days.
Yeah.
This one is a follow-up on some of the stuff that we were talking about on Monday. The Daily Beast piece had People's Convoy truckers escalate D.C. tactics but fail miserably again.
Right.
So
Training
so
again
far,
today.
Beltway 3, Convoy 0. This is Zachary
They're not
Patrizo,
doing
I
well.
guess, who's the media reporter who's assigned to follow this. And it's good that he's a media reporter because this is a media event and nothing else.
A circus.
And, they keep trying to, we talked about the fact that last time they tried it, they broke down and they weren't really doing anything. And there was so much traffic, you really couldn't tell which part was the convoy and which wasn't. And there were a lot of pickup trucks and not that many semis because it cost $12,000 to drive a semi from Maryland around D.C. on the Beltway and then back. And so you can't do that every day unless you're getting funded by the Russians. And that Russian money has been cut off. So
that seems like
it'll be
it's
interesting
too
to see what
high.
happens to that. But then they decided to go for 2 lanes instead of 1. That didn't work. And then they decided that the best thing they could do, besides making a list of demands that nobody's paying attention to, is go talk to Ted Cruz, which they did. And what they're going to do next, nobody really knows. And frankly, nobody really cares. So it turns out, it's kind of a dud.
Okay.
Speaking of duds,
Yeah.
that rhymes with Bud. GOP Representative Ted Budd is trailing in polls and lagging in fundraising in North Carolina, even though he's Trump's anointed.
Is he? For what?
Yeah, for Senate race.
Oh.
He wanted, Pat
wonder he's
McCrory
not
was
doing
thinking of running, and out of the blue, Trump said, no, I want Ted Budd.
Ted Budd.
All of a sudden, Ted Budd became,
It's Ted Budd.
not Ted Bundy, don't get them confused,
Oh.
but Ted Budd, all of a sudden
Sounds
became
like
the
it.
front runner for like a day, but it turns out he's doing pretty badly. Representative
great.
Ted Budd, the congressman Trump unexpectedly endorsed last summer, has fallen in recent polling and lagged in fundraising, leaving him chasing the frontrunner, former Governor Pat McCrory. The presence of former Representative
off
Mark
McCrory,
Walker in the primary, who's competing with Budd for the most conservative pro-Trump voters, is further complicating Budd's efforts with just over 2 months to go until the May primary. Amid speculation in Trump world that the former president has grown to regret his early endorsement of Budd, Trump raised the issue at an RNC donor dinner in New Orleans on Saturday, according to audio of the event obtained by Politico, who's writing this up. How are we doing? How's Ted Budd doing? All right, we got to get Walker out of that race. Get him out of the race, okay?
Walker.
Will no one rid me of this meddlesome
I guess.
interloper in my race?
I
Trump earlier this year reiterated his support for Budd. He even sought to convince Walker to bow out by dangling a House endorsement in an attempt to clear the field. That didn't work.
Okay.
Now, where else did I
Walker?
see that? Virgil
Virgil.
or something? A Democrat turned Republican who's really super conservative.
I don't know. Oh, Virgil Good, wasn't he? And
I
there's
can't
a Virgil
remember.
Good was like a guy from Virginia.
It's one of these things where Trump wanted
Right?
somebody to run, so he said, "Why don't I'll endorse you if you run for this other race."
Oh.
So he said, "Okay," and ran for the other race, freeing up Trump's select pick. And of course, Trump abandoned him once he went to that other race.
Oh. Well, that's a problem with Trump, if you care. Maybe it's a good thing, really. I need to accept his endorsement so as to not anger the MAGA people, but I don't really want him around. So maybe he'll drop his endorsement later and leave.
So he wants his fellow
Bored.
Walker out of the race, and Walker is a former Baptist minister who was chair of the Republican Study Committee while in Congress.
remember
And
him
so
either.
he's got a lot of connections to ultra-conservative voters,
What do you
and
know?
he's not budging. And Trump telling him to get out of the race doesn't seem to faze him. So the point I'm trying to make is that, Trump doesn't have uncontested control of
Yes.
Republicans even in primaries where you
Everyone's
think
gotta
he's
test
strongest.
him. They're following the Ron DeSantis model. You got to position yourself to test the waters and push the boundaries every once in a while.
Right. Well, when you're testing the waters and pushing the boundaries and finding out you're not as strong as you thought you were, it's going to
Well,
be
then
a
you're
problem.
supposed to get out. But all right, well, good. They'll have a big fight. No one ever heard of Bud or Walker, for that matter. Probably, I haven't. So that's the answer. Confirms my priors. I don't know those guys. I really don't. But all right, he loves
Anyway,
to endorse.
Glenn Bolger, a pollster from McCrory said Tuesday he had just completed a survey this week on Republican primary voters in an unnamed state.
Okay, not this one.
Okay.
It's obviously this one.
That attacking Putin is a good line for Republicans.
Wow.
Just like Obama and Biden, Governor McCrory seems determined to underestimate Putin. Ted Budd knows these are serious times that require strength. Remember, I told you it was all going to be about strength and weakness. Not the empty sound bites preferred by Biden and McCrory.
Those two allies,
right?
Biden
Ask
and
which
McCrory.
country they would support in the war between Russia and Ukraine in this unnamed state. 87% of GOP primary voters said Ukraine, and 4% said Russia.
Yeah, last week it was the opposite, but okay.
And last week it would be opposite. That's exactly right. So rallying behind Ukraine and against Russia is a thing on the GOP. Putin is no longer the icon of everything that's wonderful about humanity.
Yes, good.
But then you have to ask them, okay, well, what about Trump, who basically supported Putin over Zelensky, and that's why he got impeached? Well, that didn't happen because history between 2016 and 2020 is no longer allowed to be taught in the schools according to new laws that we're having passed at GOP legislatures all over the country.
No history. Okay, right. Well, I guess you can do it. Frees you up to do
That's
anything.
basically the state,
We never
and you
heard of
can
Putin.
sustain that for a little while, but you can't sustain that forever.
I guess not. All right. Well,
So it turns
Interesting.
out that that's having a huge impact in places like Pennsylvania and other
So he could have been
states
polling
that are swing states, purple states. And
Okay.
it's up to the Democrats. That's their job. They're politicians to exploit the uncertainty about how we're supposed to think about Ukraine and Russia when they run against the GOP. You have to point out the hypocrisy. You have to point out, you said last week the exact opposite, and here's a video clip of you saying that. And so, what about Trump, who, as a matter of fact,
sorry, can't help it.
supported Russia over Ukraine? Do you still support Trump? I mean, you got to pin them on this.
You have to put a kitchen table in it somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, well, ask these questions at the kitchen table with Harry and Louise.
You could do that.
In fact, Harry and Louise should be the ones interviewing these
That's right.
Republicans, asking the question.
Right. Why not? Well,
That's
it
just
requires
politics,
hammering
but,
the Republicans.
you got to do what you got to
that's
do.
not happening. Okay. Hopefully someone will step up and do that. And, and we won't have too many people say, well, no, people really are worried about the, something else. Price of milk. Remember, we only need 12 gallons of milk each week.
Well, it's going to be – people are always going to worry about the price of gas because you need gas to get to work. Interestingly,
If you have to go.
if you did non-pharmaceutical interventions like stay home and don't go to work, it would not only help with the pandemic,
That is right.
it would help you with your gas bill.
It would. I'd pay less.
You should support that.
I should. I do, as a matter of fact. And that plus the fact that at kitchen tables all over America, people are saying, I don't, really want to go back that often, to be honest. Every once in a while, sure.
But I really hated working in the office, and I'm going to discuss
never
that
made
in the
any sense.
podcast that I run from my kitchen table.
Right. Like me, things that I do. Yeah. And if you look at it closely enough, all work is remote work. You're going to go to the office? Well, do all your suppliers work there too? No?
Yeah,
Oh,
you're
so then-
just doing your home work in a remote place, which
so
is
many
the office.
people, they're talking about I have to go back to the office now, and I go and all I do is I sit at a different desk and look at my laptop and have meetings with people who aren't there.
Yeah, I think anybody who says, I'm happy to get back to the office is
There are
either
very
lying
few.
or in need of counsel.
Probably. There are a few people who say, well, I'm happy to go in once a week or even
I'm glad
twice a
to
week.
be able to go and come as I
go
see
do a
fit
thing.
and as I
Right.
please. That's fine. I get that.
That's a yes.
But the fact that I'm happy to be there from 8 a.m.
Yeah.
until 5:30 p.m. and get caught in rush hour
Right.
and have to stay there whether I'm doing anything productive or not on that particular day, I love it.
No.
How to succeed in business without really
I
trying.
guess so.
No, I don't think
well,
so.
I've always thought that.
I play it the company way. Well, no, you don't really. I mean,
Well, bosses like that, and that's always who I suspect has always
well, how
been
can you
behind-
boss people around if there's nobody in the office?
Right. Well, right. So that's why they need people there.
That's why they
And
need
they
people
say,
there.
I love I can't wait to get up in the morning. I'm an early riser and I get started because, and people are into that if life at work is about others implementing your vision for you and people listening to you and doing your stuff for you, then getting up and going to work and being a boss is a great thing. And if it's all about you having to subsume everything you are to the jerky boss who might also be, touching you inappropriately as well.
Well, not only that, and while the
thrill.
corporation just triples its profits while your
right.
wages stagnate. I mean, it's important that you contribute to that because me.
Right. And I guess also, right, if the results of getting up early and going to work and working hard and playing hard is I get a yacht, you'll be enthused about it. And if the result is the other guy gets the yacht for the work that I'm doing, then not so much. I'd rather save on gas. Thank you. It's not a mystery.
So speaking of people who actually do work, here's a nice piece from Stat News. Nurses more powerful and visible after COVID capitalized on new clout in Washington. The country's roughly 4 million nurses are using the attention and the accompanying political clout to spotlight their sometimes oppressive working conditions. Amid the country's health emergency and ongoing shortage of health workers, they're scrambling to make sure the moment doesn't slip away. Now, here are some people who actually are happy to go to the office because it's the only place they can do their job.
They never stopped.
They never stopped going. And they like what they do because if they didn't like what they do, there is no freaking way they would be doing this.
I don't understand how you could do it. Yes. I also don't really understand why they like what they do, but I'm glad they
like
did. It's a miracle. People. Fantastic. I like staying away from
when families get better and they think that you're part of, the team that helped that happen.
Right. I will fake being a hero nurse. And
it's an opening advocate say that nurses have waited for years or even decades, and while they lament that it took a pandemic to win Washington's attention, national nursing groups as well as grassroots advocates say the national conversation about health worker shortage and work conditions in hospitals represents a unique opportunity.
Yes.
Okay, I'm a big fan of single-payer health care.
You are? You are?
Oh. I think that the nurses would be a lot more effective about pushing nursing conditions and nursing wages than trying to push single-payer health care as their sole and only issue.
All right. I mean, it would seem to make more sense, but I don't know. Maybe they have something there.
Because this is an opportunity. This is the window. Take advantage.
Yeah. I hope they can. If they can't win that, but they can win single-payer health care, then I guess try that. But I don't know. I don't think
it's backbreaking work, and this pandemic just put it out there for the world to see. A registered nurse in Minnesota and the co-president of National Nurses United, the country's largest professional association for nurses, finally someone's at least attempting to listen to what we've been saying for a long time, and that's very gratifying. And it is. National Nurses United, with California having a huge segment of that, is a good advocate. AFT, American Federation of Teachers, also has a major component of unionized nurses.
Do they?
And there are plenty of nurses who aren't unionized. So, there's a whole lot in that mix, and somebody's got to be an advocate for everybody.
Sure.
And I remember my father was a union organizer, as was my mom.
Right.
And I remember asking as a kid, how come everybody isn't in a union? And my dad said to me, you don't have to be. Like all the people in Rochester, New York, get paid more because you only need one union to get the wages up, and then everybody's wages go up. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, but you could
that's how I was brought up. So you don't all have to join the union; you just have to all support the union.
Yeah, sure. You don't have to wear a mask.
It'd be better if you all join the union, but then you don't have to decide. Well, there's competing unions. Which one am I going to join? Well, that's not really the issue. The issue is supporting what they're doing.
Well, I'm okay with that. Good. Settled.
Right. So the recent advocacy groundswell, has this article point out, it highlights as nurses' unusual position while doctors, insurers, and drug companies are often the heavyweights in Washington. The current crisis has given nurses more leverage in Washington than at any point in years, perhaps ever. At the center of their new advocacy agenda is a United Nurses March planned for May 12th, so keep an eye out for that. Just steps in the White House.
Okay.
They already include over 200,000 members, and thousands more nurses are expected to attend satellite events planned for state capitals around the country.
All right.
So keep an eye on that.
Anywhere you live.
travel nurses are finding this to be very lucrative. And lawmakers have argued such fees are exorbitant, but the way you fix that is that you pay your own local people more, and so you don't need travel nurses.
Oh. All right. I guess that would be good, too.
Right.
Travel nurses will be the ones in Washington on May 12th because they travel.
Mm.
Doesn't matter.
So, just keep an eye on that. There's a lot of issues there that ought to be covered more. One of the many things that the Democratic Party needs to be clear about is how and where it supports labor. And so, we got elections coming up, but that's not the reason to do this. The reason to do this is the right thing. And this is one of those situations where you could do well by doing good.
Okay.
And, when it comes to healthcare and healthcare reform, single payer doesn't have to be the single and only issue. Not if it drowns out the other things that are important to working folks.
Is that a central focus of is that going to be an issue at the march?
I don't know. I don't know what the march is going to do. I'm just saying that's my opinion.
Oh, all right. Well, then, all right. I was like, I'm trying to think about it. Like, I don't know. I could see some nurses being interested in it, but I'm not certain.
I'm interested in it too.
Nurses,
but, raising wages, that's kind of interesting too, and don't sideline it for one, for the other.
No, that's but
especially
that's a major function
if your focus is going to be something that makes everybody turn off and say, "Oh, that same old stuff again."
Yeah.
Like defund the police.
Oh. Well, maybe they should do that. Defund doctors.
Maybe they shouldn't do that.
Well,
right?
I don't think
maybe
that's
you should just concentrate on the stuff that actually, is important instead of the slogans.
I don't know how that get into it. I bet the nurses won't say that.
Because, if you have a national organization or a national movement and you focus on something that's immediately divisive and doesn't specifically get anything done, it's a lot of lost, sunk hours.
Yeah. I don't think we're in danger.
In fact,
of that
Biden
with the
addressed
nurses?
it in his State of the Union speech. It was important enough for the Democratic Party to say, we're funding the police, okay? End of issue.
Yeah. All right. I didn't say it. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know. I didn't think the nurses were into that, but we'll find out.
No, but, you always have this situation where you have a large movement with important things to say and do, and you want to be careful to try to make sure that you're focusing on core issues and not being distracted by other things.
Okay. I feel like we're getting distracted by another thing.
Well, you see it in all sorts of other, this is like a generic principle here. I don't know what the nurses are going to be specifically marching about. I don't know what their requests, demands, or anything else are. I do know they have increased clout and they expect to take advantage of it. And that's all a good thing.
Yes.
If you're going to do voting rights, Reverend William Barber and his organization trying to get things done at a grassroots level with a consistent message is a good thing. There's all sorts of stuff that needs reform in this particular point in time that won't get reformed if Republicans wind up retaking Congress. And so, you have to make sure that what you want in terms of policy winds up matching the politics. A long-running theme on this show with me, as you know, you can't have policy unless you do the politics right.
That's true.
The reason to do politics is to get your policy.
Have policy, but...
You're not going to win on policy, so you better do the politics. That's really what I'm saying here. So I don't think that's a distraction at all.
I don't know. I don't know how we got here. I'm not certain what happened.
Because it's a wide-ranging podcast where we talk about what we want. That's how we got here.
Well, I don't know what to do now.
Right? We have a generic large picture, which is how you organize in a way that's effective, and then you have a smaller focus. Well, let's give you a good example. We have nurses coming to Washington to accomplish something. What is it that they want to accomplish, and how are they going to do it? Well, there's going to be a big national march in May, so let's watch and see what they're trying to do here.
Yes.
I know that some of the big organizations prior to the march were focusing on stuff that wasn't capturing the public's attention. And now they have a new opportunity, says this article, and let's see what they do with it. That's how we got here.
All right. Okay. Let's see what they do with it. I don't think it'll be about police. But if it is, I don't think it'll be about police. In their particular case, they have made their major issue single-payer healthcare. Okay.
And let's see if they shift from that to something that has a little bit more broad.
Is that every nurse? Well, probably not every nurse's organization either. But that would be. Is that an U
Yeah,
central plank. Is that what it is? I
Has
think
been.
that makes that sounds familiar, right? Like they were just a little bit more interested in that than, say, the American, I don't know, Nurses Association. Is that a thing? I don't know. I think that used to be the leading nursing union, and then there wasn't the NNU a breakaway union at some point?
I don't know their history. They're
This
pretty large.
rings. I don't know. Well, it rings a bell, but it might just be I have ringing in my ears. This is what's happening, and I hit my head on something, and I don't remember this correctly. All right.
Right.
Well,
National
we'll
Nurses
look into
United, with more than 175,000 members nationwide, is the largest union and professional association of registered nurses in U.S. history.
What are the other ones?
So hard to call them a breakaway.
No. Well, unless they got to be the biggest one by doing that. But I don't know.
They were
remember a
founded in
couple of years ago.
2009
Yeah.
with a merger of the California Nurses Association.
Yes. I was going to say
United American Nurses.
California nurses were maybe that's it. They were sort of like not. They were breaking away from a national organization, and all right, so they became the core of NNU. But I feel like this was something we talked about years ago.
Yeah,
and
we did.
I don't remember why. Okay.
Because I like union stuff.
Yes. Well, that's true, and everybody should.
Yeah,
But
everybody
okay,
should.
I grew confused about this one.
Right. So if you go to National Nurses United homepage,
Yeah.
right?
Should we?
I
I will.
you can find plenty about Medicare for all.
Okay. Oh yeah. All right. So I see that. So that's right. That's a big major issue for them, and they have a big page on it and everything. And I'd be curious to read. It's not immediately obvious to me what the advantage is, except it's just caring about people getting quality health care. So seems to be very altruistic. I don't see that. It's not a pay issue. It's not that Medicare would pay nurses a lot more. They'd probably pay them less. But okay.
Well, I'm leaving,
That's
but
nice.
I'll leave you this
And
story
nice of you as well. Yes?
about how NNU became a force for Medicare for all.
Okay. That will answer
you're
the question. Now I am. And now you're leaving. And I can't even show
But I'll give you this data, and
talk about it
we'll be back
tomorrow.
tomorrow, and we can talk about it then if you want, or you could read it on the show, whatever you want to do.
Okay. Call us, nurses. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio, and I feel like I do need to know this. And so, yeah, Greg confirms that Medicare for All is a signature issue for NNU, and now I'm kind of intrigued to it. So I guess we hit the issue hard enough that now I need to know, where did this come from, and refresh my memory about the history of the nurses' unions. I recall that there was a big fight at some point between the California nurses and some other major nursing organization, and I can't bring to mind what it was about. Central to everything for a long time, and now I can't remember it. But that's because we had a crazy president, and he tried to steal the second election too, and Russia, and now Ukraine and Russia, and storming the Capitol, and global pandemic, and there's been a few distractions since then. But he's handed me this thing here, how the National Nurses United became a force for Medicare for all. I am kind of interested in that now. Let's see if we can get the gist of it. It's not too long an article. The Nurses Union provides the organizing might behind the push for national single-payer health care. Harry Cheadle writes at, where am I reading? bluetent.us. All right. Why not? Let's try it. Go to any rally, it says, in favor of Medicare for all, or any protest of the healthcare industry's practices, and chances are you'll see the nurses, easily identifiable by their red shirts and signs, sometimes clad in scrubs or PPE now, that marks them as medical workers. They are often the loudest voices at these events, and no wonder the main nurses union, National Nurses United, is probably the most prominent left-wing activist organization in all of the labor movement. You could have a fight on your hands about that one, but maybe. Lots of contenders lately in the past, I don't know, let's say time span of 15 years or so. SEIU would want to make a claim to that. The teachers union would want to make a claim to that one, particularly AFT. Briefly, the flight attendants union has come on real strong lately. It had a very active and outspoken president, and I think still president, right? She was making the rounds. And what the hell was that about, too? I can't even remember what exactly the issue was there. But, all right. Well, anyway, we'll read on here. The main nurses union, NNU, probably the most prominent left-wing activist organization in all the labor movement. NNU doesn't just passionately support Medicare for all, a natural cause given its membership. Do you think? See, I don't. But anyway, but has campaigned for a tax on Wall Street and endorsed Bernie Sanders in both 2016 and 2020, though it has only around 150,000 members, a fraction of the membership of union giants like SEIU. There they are. NNU punches above its weight politically, both in terms of money. It donated more than $7 million to pro-Democrat PACs in 2020 and in-your-face activism. All right. What else has Greg sent me here? Another getting punched in the face by passengers. Yes, that was the issue for the flight attendants. That certainly was an issue. Yeah. Was that? I guess that must have been it. But, well, you know, I will say this. If you're the head of the flight attendants union and there's a sudden rash of people punching flight attendants in flight and you can't get national attention for that, then, you know, don't worry about it because the test was more than passed. I mean, but seriously, I guess if they had not gotten enough attention, they would have said, we need somebody better. Well, they already had them. The union formed in 2009, NNU, back with the nurses. Well, and here we go. When several nursing unions came together under a single umbrella organization. The most prominent of these was probably the California Nurses Association. I definitely remember this, but I don't know why. Which had fought for and won a first-in-a-nation law mandating a nurse-to-patient ratio in state hospitals. Okay. When then-Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, wow, yeah, I forgot, attempted to avoid implementing the law in the mid-2000s, nurses protested at one of his events, to which he replied that the union was a special interest, or he would have special interest, and he was always kicking their butts. Wow. That's weird and dumb. The union jumped all over that intemperate remark and subsequently got the staffing ratio they had been seeking. That battle and others were orchestrated by Roseanne DeMauro, who went on to run NNU with a pugilistic streak. Okay. This included Heal America, Tax Wall Street campaign, in 2011 that asked lawmakers to tax financial transactions. Nurses protested at congressional offices and on Wall Street, when the ideologically compatible Occupy Wall Street broke out months later, NNU members set up first aid stations in several cities. And then here, the section on Medicare for All, their signature issue. The CNA, now an affiliate of NNU, was the driving force behind the 2017 push for single-payer health care in California, though Democrats controlled the supermajority in the legislature, the bill didn't pass after Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon refused to bring it up for a vote, saying that the legislation was was woefully incomplete. This led to cries of betrayal from nurses and other single-payer advocates, some of whom even attempted to get Rendon recalled. NNU did not directly support the recall effort. Though other labor groups backed Rendon's decision, NNU joined protests against him during one of the state's most bitter political spats. NNU usually explains its support for Medicare for All as a consequence of its members knowing how badly the current healthcare system is failing patients. So this makes some sense to me now. I have watched as patients refuse the medications, procedures, and care that they need because they cannot afford the costs of their co-pays or deductibles. NNU President Gene Ross told Congress last year. I've watched as insurance corporations refuse to cover the care that's required for the health and well-being of my patients. I've seen hundreds of patients who show up in the emergency room because they cannot afford the cost of preventative care because of both those with and without insurance coverage. And that certainly makes sense. But nurses may also have pragmatic reasons for backing single-payer health care, as an NNU organizer told GQ, interestingly enough, in 2019, hospitals often try to cut costs by reducing nursing salaries and shifts. The union believes that under Medicare for All, more money would flow to nurses. Well, that certainly makes traditional union sense. the American Nurses Association, which is much larger than NNU, disagrees. Now, what? Didn't we just hear a second ago that NNU was much larger than anybody, right? Or maybe is American Nursing Association not a union? Is that maybe the issue? And NNU is the biggest union? I don't know. Maybe we can straighten that out at some point. But yeah, National Nurses United, the largest union and professional association of registered nurses in U.S. history. But it may just be the case that the American Nurses Association is just a industry group that doesn't consider itself a union. Is that the case? I don't know. Now I got to look. All right. American Nurses Association. Let's see. I mean, should I look? They have like a Wikipedia entry that'll tell me quick and easily what they are, like give me a definition and everything. Let's look. They should. All right. Oh, here comes the. Okay, let's see. The ANA, which is a 501c6 professional organization to advance and protect the profession of nursing. And does that mean is a union? Isn't a union? I don't know. It's a 501c6. Let's see. I'll take a look at the quick scroll over for that one. All right. Well, that doesn't answer my question either. But this isn't how I intended to spend the day here. But I like to get answers and understand what I'm reading and what I've been talking about, even if I have to do it after the fact. All right. Well, I will continue reading and researching this on my own here. But it is interesting to know how the NNU came to their single payer position. And I think that's been now answered. So we can move on from there and take a look at the other things that I had put aside for discussion today. Here's the story of Enrique Tarrio, the Proud Boys leader, arrested. It is reported here by Tristan Snell on Twitter. Arrested in his underwear. That is to say, Enrique's own underwear, not Tristan's. He had no idea the feds were coming for him, which, I mean, I guess that's the evidence being he was in his underwear. Like, a lot of times they say, well, we want you to report for arrest, or we're issuing a warrant for your arrest and we're going to come and get you at some point. But they give some warning for things like this, but not this one. This one was a surprise raid and arrest. So this is the point of this tweet here is he didn't know, his lawyers didn't know, or they would have told him, or they like to see him in his underwear. I'm not certain which one. DOJ's January 6th investigation, Tristan therefore concludes, is in super stealth mode. The normal signs of a major investigation are absent. And that's, of course, been the complaint all along. And there were those who were saying, well, be patient. DOJ shouldn't be tipping their hands on all of these things. And I guess this is the first major evidence in some time that there's more than meets the eye. And that's good. And maybe it'll buy them some time. And I hope it's true. And I hope they arrest more of these people in their underwear, mainly because it's embarrassing to be arrested in your underwear, generally speaking. And I like the fact that that's happening to them. I don't particularly care to see it, except insofar as I can contribute to the embarrassment of having it happen. So there we are. We also learned the other day that another of the Proud Boys leaders, what's the name of the other one? Or a former Proud Boy, now sort of like out on his own, doing his own annoying right-wing death squad kind of a thing. Nick Fuentes. Yes, he was in the news because I think he announced that he would be moving out of his parents' house. That wasn't the gist of the announcement, but I think he made it a part of it, and everyone was shocked to find out that he was living in his parents' basement still. I don't know if it was really in the basement. But I wanted to point out there that, I mean, good for him trying to grow up and everything. But I wonder how much of the fact that he never really had to be responsible for earning his own way in the world facilitates this kind of activism where you become famous by doing and saying outrageous things that are, antisocial at their core, essentially. And you think, well, how can you make your way in the world when everybody knows that you're this kind of a bigot and outlaw? They could cut you off from everything, and it would be impossible to earn a living and, maintain a home and a family. And the answer is, if you never have to do that, or have never had to do that, then it becomes easier, right? His parents continue to let him live in the basement. He can be as outrageous as he wants because he doesn't need to have a job, except insofar as his parents probably yell at him all the time, go get a job. Then he starts a GoFundMe thing and says, I like to punch Antifa. And there's enough people that'll send him enough cash that he can point to that and say, hey, I do have a job, Mom and Dad. I guess it's not working anymore, and he's going to have to move out. All right. What other fun things do I have to share with you? Okay, this is just general information that is good background. Oh, you know what? Yeah, this was of interest. Just a good callback for those who have been longtime listeners to the show, and another excuse to bring back a recurring theme here. I saw a few people tweeting around the article from when? I don't know. Well, let's open it up and take a look. NBC News was tweeting it around yesterday. Is it current? Yes, it is. And their tweet was exposure to leaded gasoline. Remember leaded gasoline? It's gone now. But remember it, if you don't, maybe the reason is leaded gasoline. Because leaded gasoline exposure lowered the IQ of about half the population of the U.S., a new study estimates. I don't know what was responsible for lowering the IQ of the other half, but it seems like it was kind of universal. Anyway, there's a whole article attached. Lead from gasoline blunted the IQ of about half the U.S. population, the study says. It seems like a bad thing. Leaded gas was banned in 1996. I felt like it was earlier than that, but it was certainly being phased out. But I guess totally banned in 1996. But exposure to the poison cost people born before then several IQ points on average, researchers estimated. And I feel like that every day when I get on the air. But it reminded me, as people were, getting upset about this, as they should be, it reminded me that right now, another major source of lead exposure, remember the old articles that we shared from the Seattle Times, another major source of lead exposure, shooting ranges, particularly indoor shooting ranges, where they do have measures to mitigate this thing, ventilation systems. They knew right away that airborne contaminants needed to be mitigated with very high-powered ventilation systems, but they didn't share that knowledge with schools at any point. But guns and schools, you know how they don't get along as it is. Well, anyway, it is possible to mitigate the lead presence inside indoor shooting ranges, but as you know, the ammunition itself is lead. There's particulate lead that gets expelled with the gases, particularly from out of the semi-automatic weapons. All firing bullets produces gases in any kind of weapon, but the gas, I guess I'm thinking of the semi-automatics because they use the gas to, run the mechanism that loads the next round. But I guess the same gases are produced even in non-automated weapons. But and then of course the bullets themselves, mostly I guess inside the shooting ranges you'd be using lead tipped bullets, and then they fly through the air, they smash into the targets, they smash into the backstops, they atomize the end of the thing. So there's lead in the air all over the place, and it's a major indoor health hazard. And the Seattle Times years ago in 2014 did this fantastic series, very extensive series on the damage that it was doing, and how a lot of these ranges, because it's a major expense to do the remediation necessary. A lot of places that are conscientious about it will have these high-powered ventilation systems, very costly, and they shut down from time to time to clean up. But of course, the employees who have to do the cleaning have to be wearing PPE and scrub the place down, and you can't be open while you're doing this work, and I don't know, sometimes you're closed for a couple of days, so it's costly to do. So of course, because guns are involved, some of these places began insisting, you can't make me do it. The EPA rules, the OSHA rules, the various other legal mechanisms by which governments at different levels were requiring mediation. They just said, well, you can't make me spend that money or incur that cost because that's an additional burden on the Second Amendment. It says that I should have the right to bear arms, and somehow that's expandable too. It means that I should be able to shoot in this particular place whenever I want to, regardless of the environmental health hazards to myself and others. And you can never make me close down to clean up or pay extra money because that's just a burden on the Second Amendment. And in some places they've won the cases on it, but they refuse to do the work and people are getting sick. It was just kind of an amazing thing. So there you go. I just wanted to remind everybody of that fantastic series and remind everybody that really that was like the original neutron bomb for morons even before COVID. The idea that it was such a huge burden on the Second Amendment to clean up lead contamination here. And so for freedom, I'm going to go and after exposing myself to lead in my leaded gasoline for freedom, I'm going to go to the shooting range so I can learn, or I can flap my gums anyway, about fighting tyranny. I'm going to fight the government, the one that wants to help me not lose IQ points to leaded gas and contaminated gun ranges. But the more I resist them, the more lead I get, and the more lead I get, the more I resist them from a crazy standpoint. And it's just a recurring cycle. Seems like it would feed on itself. Odd that a particular portion of the population, anti-government types, would single themselves out for bigger servings of lead for freedom. Just thought I'd share that one with you. Let's see. Yes, a nice thread here from the Twitter feed of Mueller, she wrote, which, I guess you'd be kind of a full-time project trying to redeem yourself for your faith in the Mueller investigation. But there's much to be mined from that, and some of it is mined here today or yesterday. In this thread, Putin's plan shows why he didn't invade Ukraine under Trump. Lots of people, pundit types and others, were walking around scratching their chin and saying, why didn't Putin invade Ukraine when Trump was president if they were coordinating on everything? If Russiagate was real, if there really was a situation where the Russians were installing Trump for some reason to their own advantage, why not invade then? And that's supposed to be like the killer argument. Anyway, I think a good answer here from Mueller, she wrote, and reminding us of Greg's thesis that it's all one story. Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, plus the impeachment over Ukraine, plus January 6th, plus Russiagate, and the whole thing back to 2016. So, how does this get justified? The peace deal just offered just recently by Putin. This is, I think, the key for illustrating it. If you take a look at the peace deals on the table from the Russians, they say they're peace deals. In other words, we'll end the war here in Ukraine in exchange for these concessions. Well, as it turns out, for the most part, the concessions that they're demanding in exchange for ending the war are demands that they made previously, prior to the war, and in the context of the Trump administration. And we're reminded through this thread how many times people in the Trump administration said, or peripheral to the Trump administration, said they were carrying with them to one party or another a peace deal, a peace plan for Ukraine to end the already existing military confrontation and tension between them after the invasion and annexation of Crimea, right? So think back to all of that. As the thread reads here, the peace deal Putin just offered is the same kind of deal that Trump allies were trying to get for Putin in all those years. As long as what Putin wanted was on the table, In other words, there was no need to invade. Why didn't you invade during the Trump administration? And the answer ultimately is because the things I aim to get out of the invasion of the rest of Ukraine are the things I was demanding before, and it looked like I might be able to get without spending troops and materiel. Right? Why spend the money and lose the lives on a war if somebody might hand this to me for free? I'll read you the rest of it. I think it makes a great deal of sense. According to the Mueller report, trying to redeem the faith in Mueller here, and a sloppily redacted filing by Manafort, Paulie Walnuts, as they call Paul Manafort in this, and sanctioned Russian spy Kilimnik, remember Konstantin Kilimnik, worked on the Ukraine peace plan, in quotes there. According to documents, the plan was to put Yanukovych back in power in Ukraine and carve it up for Putin. I, by the way, have found a corrector, the correct pronunciation for that name. I think I've been saying like Yanukovych, which made more sense to me, but I watched part of the documentary, the name of which I can no longer remember, but involved the word winter, and now you can remind me, on Netflix. Those of you who may have seen it, I thought it was timely, but explaining the events of the initial, I guess what they at first were calling Orange Revolution in Ukraine, and good context for what's going on now. And I think they were smart to put it back up prominently on Netflix. And I guess he says Yanukovych, which I didn't know, but okay, that's the pronunciation. So according to these documents about the peace plan that Paul Manafort and Konstantin Kilimnik were promoting, they would bring back Yanukovych, which was Manafort's client, of course, and bring him back to power in Ukraine, and then carve it up, and I guess Donbass and Luhansk or whatever the supposed breakaway republics are would then fall back into Russian hands. Manafort worked for Yanukovych, trying to make him a more likable guy. That was, of course, his job as his consultant, his political consultant. He was paid by Oleg Deripaska, you may recall, who eventually sued him. But when Manafort got the job grooming Trump to install him for Putin, Manafort indicated he would make Deripaska whole. You remember that he used that terminology. I owe you lots of money. You're suing me for it, but I'll make you whole in some other way. The compensation I'll give you is I will allow you to deliver for Putin the installation of Donald Trump as president of the United States. The thread goes on. Van der Zwaan, remember him? He was one of the early guys to actually, early and only few, small in number, the number of guys who got convicted from what was levied against them by the Mueller report. But what was his name? Alexander Van der Zwaan, right? And I didn't recall that he had this relationship. Son-in-law of Alpha Bank mogul German Khan. I did not know that. But Van der Zwaan was indicted by Mueller for lying about and on behalf of Yanukovych by bad-mouthing his opponent. Who was his opponent at the time? Remember, Yulia Tymoshenko, the lady with the big blonde braids. You may remember her. Without registering as a foreign agent. That was his problem. And he, or included here is a link to BuzzFeed News story about that case. But yeah, I didn't realize that he had a connection to Alpha Bank as well. And Yulia Tymoshenko, we spent some time on her on the show a long time ago too. The fact that she is a big player who made her money in oil and gas as well. And Yanukovych, I guess, worked for the opposite cartel. Anyway, Kilimnik also had another Ukraine peace plan in the works called the Mariupol plan. I don't know how that is pronounced, but that name back in the news, the city back in the news again during the war. Anyway, so while Manafort was trying to install Trump, he was helping Russian-backed separatists with a plan that would hand Ukraine back to Putin. Is this making more sense now? The question is asked. And I think yes. Another peace plan, by the way, later worked on by Michael Cohen, you remember? And Mike Flynn, the notorious spy, and Artemenko, one of the other oligarchs. And we all remember Manafort, along with Dearborn and Mashburn, effing, as they say, effing up the Ukraine language in the Republican platform in 2016 in Cleveland. So, yes, Russia was helping Donald win the election while his allies were putting together plans to drop sanctions and hand Ukraine over to Putin. Manafort was there for all of it, and Trump pardoned him. And when Ukraine wasn't down with the plan, Donald withheld aid from them. And then they fell into this war. What do you know?
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Edwards Radio. And just to sum up, does that all make some more sense to you now? The number of times that we've heard of people who are carrying secret Ukraine peace plans. I think Carter Page at some point showed up saying he was ferrying Ukraine peace plan or proposed peace plan back and forth. And at the time, everybody was, normal non-Trump people were reacting to the idea of, well, this is a terrible peace plan. The peace plan is for them to give away huge chunks of their territory and probably to depose their newly elected president and replace him with the Putin-aligned previous president who was driven out of the country by the uprisings in the Orange Revolution and driven from office. So, basically, the reason, the simplest, I guess, answer to why didn't Putin invade during the Trump administration is it looked like the Trump administration might be able to accomplish for him relatively peacefully what he would otherwise have to accomplish with a very costly military invasion. They kept discussing the idea of carving up Ukraine and replacing its president with someone friendly to Putin as a peace plan. And there was a moment there, like if the Russians can, it doesn't take much for them to dream up a plan whereby they get everything that they want, right? Of course, the Russian idea of a peace plan is we'll have peace with Ukraine if Ukraine surrenders to us, gives us the regions we want, Crimea, Donbass, Luhansk, and the rest, and replaces their government with one that's friendly to our interests. Well, no, of course not. We're not going to agree to that. That's a horrible deal. Well, ordinarily we would invade you, but as it happens, we have this plan. Okay, Russia wants that to happen, and the rest of the world ordinarily says, "To hell with you." No, you're not going to get that, and so the choices are either sit there unsatisfied and not have it, or you could try to just work to undermine things, or bolster your own candidates, or your own choice of candidates in the next election in Ukraine. But that's risky. You might not win. However, if you, let's say we're able to get some other member of the United Nations Security Council, permanent member of the United Nations Security Council, and your chief geopolitical rival for the past, 100 years, the United States, officially in the person of the person who purported to be president of the United States, and acting purportedly in the interest of the United States, presumably, even though none of us presumed that that was the case, to come out publicly and say, yeah, the United States agrees that Russia should be granted these concessions, and then we'll have peace. Now, it may still be the case that everybody else says no, that the other permanent members of the UN Security Council say no way. Who knows where the Chinese come down on all of this? Maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe they think that they could pull the same maneuver later, so they will at least not object for the time being. True that the UK and French might object to that under normal circumstances, but let's say you drive them to Brexit and replace the normal prime minister's government with a Boris Johnson government, and Londongrad plan is now in full effect. And let's say that the Putin-aligned Marine Le Pen somehow leverages her way into office in France instead of Emmanuel Macron, and it was a close call for a while, as I recall. Might it have, I mean, it seems like a dumb plan, quite honestly. If you had come to me a couple of years ago and said, yeah, my plan is to win Putin-friendly presidencies in the entirety of the rest of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council in order to avoid a veto of my peace plan. But if you got everybody to sign on, or even just the United States to sign on, the rest of the world might say, I don't know exactly what's going on here, but I guess this is the solution we should reluctantly back because the Russians are what they are. They want this, and we can understand that ambition. Not sure why the Americans are in favor of this. But I guess they are, and what are we going to do? We're going to argue with both Russia, a political union as between Russia and the United States, you know, even if not an outright political union like I kept saying they were actually interested in. Much more the case when Trump is in power and can sign sovereignty over by just saying, well, I won't shock anybody by simply actually signing the documents, but I'll just do whatever the hell you ask and see how it goes from there. But, yeah, that could have been it. And that's why you wouldn't invade. Like, it's much more costly and damaging to do this by force of arms officially, when you could do it instead with mercenary groups like Wagner Group that we've been talking about, and the other volunteers, and the other, well, the shadow military, as we were reminded of yesterday when we were talking to Joan about the Committee of Soldiers' Mothers, or Mothers of Soldiers, and I'll never get that right. There's no chance of that. But if it was going to be handed to you by the United States because the then President of the United States was willing to jump out of your way for whatever reason, well, then you wouldn't invade. Like, asking why he didn't invade during the Trump administration now sort of feels to me like, well, why wouldn't you, someone who could have bought the item they were interested in for $5, why didn't they offer $100? Well, because they thought they could get it for $5. It's actually a pretty simple answer now that I think about it. And then there is one more tweet, by the way, in this thread I never got to, where it says, Rudy and his pals got Jovanovic, you remember our ambassador to the United States, who was muscled out by Rudy Giuliani and his efforts to prevail on Trump to fire her, right? Got Jovanovic out of the way and worked to extort Zelensky for fake dirt on Biden. You all remember this part. So Donald could stay in power and continue to pursue Putin's plan for Ukraine. But Donald lost. With the Trump peace plan now off the table, Putin invaded instead. That was all the answer. And so can you connect that at all to January 6th? To some extent, sure, right? If you can reinstall Trump as president, then you have a shot of doing it without the full-scale invasion and all the costs that come with it. So, plausible. Seems to make more sense to me now. It was actually, I don't know, maybe it was the way people were stroking their chins when they were asking that stumper of a question. Why didn't he evade when Trump was president? Because I thought, all right, yeah, you'd think he would have been able to make out much better in terms of the PR response to the invasion. Not great, but maybe a little bit better. But I think instead the plan was, why would you have to invade? We might be able to get the government of the United States, and maybe even more. UK, France maybe would agree, just to hand things over to us, and that costs a lot less. All right, well, thanks, Mueller, she wrote. I appreciate it. And we'll move on from there. Let's see. Oh, yes, right. Here's the news that Greg brought us about the first January 6th defendant to go to trial being found guilty. And let's see. Some follow-up on Mark Meadows. Glenn Kessler picking up on the story and looking into why was it that Mark Meadows and his wife, Deborah, did, in fact, vote from a registration to a trailer home in which they never lived or even set foot by most accounts. That is a big question. And setting him up for charges of hypocrisy. Look out, Mark Meadows is a hypocrite. Starts off here with two quotes from Meadows in order to establish the hypocrisy. In August 16th, 2020, quote, talking to Jake Tapper and telling him, I don't want my vote or anyone else's to be disenfranchised. Poor use of the term here, but anyway. Do you realize how inaccurate the voter rolls are with people just moving around? Anytime you move, you'll change your driver's license, but you don't call up and say, hey, by the way, I'm re-registering. A lot of people do, but okay. Then another quote from later in August, this time on ABC's This Week, saying, we need to make sure that everybody's vote is cast. That's not what he really means. But we also need to make sure that no one else disenfranchises those by creating a fraud on the voting system. It's garbled nonsense. So it's ineffective in illustrating anything other than, well, he was kind of sort of talking about voter fraud and then committing it. Therefore, he's a hypocrite. In the run-up to the 2020 election, President Donald Trump repeatedly warned about potential election fraud, as did Meadows. But apparently what's good for the goose is not always good for the gander. Oh, no. About a month after Meadows made these statements, Charles Bethea, I don't know how he's pronounced, Bethea. He's the guy who wrote up the original story in the New Yorker. He reported that Meadows and his wife Deborah submitted voter registration forms that listed as their residential address a 14 by 62 foot mobile home with a rusted metal roof that sold for $105,000 in 2021. The forms ask for a residential address, quote, where you physically live, I guess that's on the form, is how it's defined, and are signed under penalty of perjury. So that could be a problem. According to Bethea's reporting, I wish I knew how he pronounced his name, because it's his story. Meadows and his wife have never lived there, and Meadows himself may never have set foot in the house. I don't know whether that means she did, but okay. But the couple used that address to cast ballots in the 2020 general election, in North Carolina voting records show. 6 months earlier, in March of 2020, Meadows sold for $370,000 a house in Sapphire, North Carolina, meaning the couple no longer had a place of residence in the state. Instead, they lived at the time in a condominium in Old Town Alexandria in Virginia, because of course he was still White House Chief of Staff, right? So it made sense that he would be living there, but it also meant that he had no address in North Carolina. But that did not stop Deborah Meadows from using the old Sapphire registration to cast a ballot in a June primary runoff election for someone for whom she had done fundraising. It doesn't really matter who she cast her vote for, but that does add an extra element to it. She wanted to stick around and be able to vote in the primary runoff, even though she had no domicile in North Carolina. And in fact, did exactly what Mark Meadows said there too, that she had sold her home and moved, but didn't deregister in North Carolina in the Sapphire address, and said, what the hell? I used to live there, so I'll just go ahead and vote. What's the big deal, right? These votes appear to be the exact scenario that Meadows and Trump warned about. Indeed, in his memoir, The Chief's Chief, Meadows wrote, If we could get a few more Republicans to show up in places like Minneapolis or what is this? Bemidji? I don't even know. Is that, where is that? What is that? And how do you say it? I'm not even familiar with that. I'm so much so that I'm going to look it up. Minnesota also, but I mean, I don't know how you say it. But anyway, somebody else can worry about that for the time being. What a strange thing to say. But okay, if you could get a few more Republicans to show up there or in Minneapolis, we would be able to win not only Minnesota, but the whole election. Assuming, of course, that everyone else who votes was alive, a real person, and an actual resident of the state they were voting in. Okay. That last part turned out to be a little harder than we thought. Now, that's not Glenn Kessler saying it. That's part of the quote, apparently, unless he's effed up where to put the quotation marks. That's Meadows saying that last part turned out to be a little harder than we thought, being an actual resident of the state we're voting in. Were Meadows, now Kessler speaking, were Meadows and his wife actual residents of the state they were voting in? It does not look like it. Now on to the facts. Good. I'd like to have the facts. When Meadows left Congress to join Trump's White House, 12 candidates vied in the Republican primary for North Carolina's 11th congressional district on March 3rd, 2020. Linda Bennett, a friend of the Meadows, led the pack with 22.7% of the vote. In a surprise, political novice Madison Cawthorn finished second with 20.4%, edging out Jim Davis, a member of the General Assembly in North Carolina. The fractured showing required a runoff between Bennett and Cawthorn on June 23rd. Deborah had campaigned heavily for Bennett, attending fundraisers for her across the state. On March 26th, the Meadows sold their home in North Carolina, property records show. That left the couple with only 2 undeveloped parcels of land in the state, according to his financial disclosure form. Nevertheless, Deborah voted in the June 23rd runoff, and we might have been happy that she did because it was a vote against Madison Cawthorn, but didn't work out, so who cares? But still, problematic. Sold their last home in North Carolina, the last possible home, in March, and the runoff is in June. So March 26th to June 23rd, almost a full month there. March to April to May to June. 3 months pass. All the while, she's living in Virginia and doesn't even have a house, not renting a home, nothing. No house for them in North Carolina. But she says, I'm still registered, and no one's going to stop me because I'm Mark Meadows' wife, or they may not even notice. Regardless, I'm just going to vote. And she goes and does it. Using her Transylvania County, by the way, registration to vote early, voting records show. Not only voting, but voting early, which is bad, I think, now, and something. Mark Meadows did not vote in the runoff. That's unusual. Although he did secure an endorsement from Trump for Bennett 2 weeks before that election. How do you like that? Not only does, by the way, Trump still runs around saying, I win every time. 100% record of people I endorse always win. Nothing could be further from the truth. And by the way, Madison Cawthorn, can't lick whatever it is that Trump offers up for licking, boots or anything else, fast enough or hard enough, even though when he had the chance, Donald Trump said, I don't know anything about this idiot. Screw that guy. I'm for Bennett. And now he's his biggest fan. Anyway, Cawthorn beat her 66-34, which is amazing. And that was considered a black eye for Trump and an embarrassment for Meadows. But the bigger embarrassment was he was voting illegally the whole time. Both Mark and Deborah Meadows voted in the 2020 general election, with Mark listed as voting by absentee ballot, i.e. by mail. Deborah voted early and in person. So I guess it's okay. Even though it was total fraud. Less than 2 months before the election and 3 weeks before the state's voter registration deadline, Mark and Deborah Meadows filed voter registration forms listing the mobile home as their residence. So, very intentionally executed fake plan to make it look like they still had a residence there. Both forms appear to have been filled out by the same hand. They were released with the signatures redacted. Did anybody check the signatures? We got to check the signatures. Interestingly, Meadows' mother, Mary Gail Garwood, had lived at and voted from the Sapphire property in 2012 2014, and 2016. She then registered to vote in Georgia on September 12, 2018. Mark listed the property for sale the next day, September 13, 2018. For many years, the Meadows lived in and voted from Jackson County in a house they sold in 2016 for almost $1.3 million. Then they moved to an apartment in Asheville in 2018, a move Meadows said was temporary, according to local newspaper accounts. The couple even switched party registrations in 2008 to vote in the Democratic presidential primary as part of Operation Chaos, that Rush Limbaugh-inspired tactic to keep alive the lengthy presidential primary battle between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. Now, as the 2020 general election loomed, the couple listed a house 4 miles north of the border with Georgia that they did not own or live in as their primary residence. To register to vote in North Carolina, a citizen must have lived in the county where they are registering and have resided there for at least 30 days before the date of the election, according to the state's Board of Elections. The former owner, unidentified in the article, told the New Yorker that Deborah Meadows had rented the house once, but spent only 1 or 2 nights there. Okay, so she's been inside. Mark Meadows never stayed at all. When the house was put on the market in the summer of 2020, she said, Meadows never expressed interest in buying it. Both Mark and Deborah listed a post office box in a town, about 70 miles away from the trailer near Asheville as their mailing address. You got to drive 70 miles to get your mail. The director of the County Board of Elections told the magazine that if a voter registration card is not sent back as undeliverable, then the voter goes into the system. Both forms, filed September 19th, list the move-in date as the next day, September 20th. Yet the real estate agent still listed the property for sale on Facebook on September 23rd. The property's address was later used by Meadows when he requested an absentee ballot on October 1st. Records obtained by WRAL show. The absentee ballot was requested on his behalf by Deborah, the document shows. The 900-square-foot mobile home, luxurious, right, with its modest bedrooms, is a far cry from the family's old 6,000-square-foot house in Jackson County, which had 4 bedrooms and 5.5 baths and was on nearly 6-acre lot. As the mobile home's current owner told The New Yorker, it was not the kind of place you'd think the chief of staff of the president would be staying, and indeed it wasn't. Indeed, in 2021, Meadows purchased a 3-story waterfront home of more than 6,000 square feet in South Carolina for nearly $1.6 million. Seems like he was committing himself to living there instead. Ben Williamson, a spokesperson for Meadows, did not respond to text or phone messages. George Terwilliger III, a Meadows attorney, also did not respond to requests for comment. Deborah Meadows did not respond to emails sent to her email address at Right Women PAC, where she's executive director, or to several personal email addresses. She also did not respond to a phone message. The Heritage Foundation maintains a voter fraud database with numerous instances of politicians being charged for filing false voter registration forms. Steve Watkins, a Republican House member from Kansas, was charged with 3 felonies in 2020 after he listed a postal box at a UPS store as his residence on a state voter registration form while living temporarily at his parents' home during a 2019 municipal election. In Pennsylvania, Richard Cummings, a county school board member, moved from Westmoreland County to Allegheny County in 2009, but continued voting at his Westmoreland address through the 2016 general election. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 1 year of probation. The bottom line, Meadows, of course, had an important job for the federal government, White House Chief of Staff. Perhaps that's a possible excuse. Nah, not really. I wouldn't even offer that to him. But he did sign the form. Meanwhile, Deborah Meadows appears to have voted twice under suspicious circumstances. First, the runoff primary from the address that had been sold 3 months earlier, and then by signing a form under penalty of perjury that her primary residence was the trailer, where she didn't live, obviously. Voter fraud is relatively rare. It's jarring to see such fishy behavior by someone who decried it. Yeah, that's the least you could possibly say, Glenn. But at least you said it. That's nice. I mean, you could have been a little stronger about it. But basically, they did it. They're guilty of it, and they don't care, and that's the point. And part of the issue is they love to get away with this stuff and do it all the time. But anyway, I'm just saying, if he gets away with it, maybe they prosecute him, maybe they don't. But if they don't, well, can we do this at scale? If you can get away with this, if this is available as a remedy now, and you can just say, I intended to live there, I just never got around to it because I was so busy, right? Something like that. Is that supposed to be the excuse? Well, something we've mused about before in the past. Couldn't we do this at scale? Like, what's the difference if it's one person or a million people? Why not re-register 1 million California Democrats in each of the Dakotas? We'll put 250,000 in North Dakota, 250,000 in South Dakota, 250,000 in Wyoming, and 250,000 in Montana. And if you want, even add some more, send them to Idaho. Why not? And sell a couple of trailers, maybe rent them a couple of trailers. They all live together. What can I tell you? They just love living in close quarters, and they all want their mail at the UPS store. And then, boom, 8 new Democratic Senate seats. The Dakotas, Montana, and Wyoming. 250,000 active voters who show up and vote Democratic each time would overwhelm the vote counts of registered voters who actually show up to the polls in those states, and you'd just win. You'd win both Senate seats, plus of course the congressional seats. There's not a lot of them, but more importantly, 8 seats in the Senate. Wow, that'd be huge. Throw in Idaho, 10 seats in the Senate. You now have like the supermajority that you would need to not have to nuke the filibuster, for one thing. Just saying. If it's an available thing, then maybe we should take advantage of it and do it. What's the difference? One person gets away with it, 1 million people get away with it. Everybody should be able to get away with it. Try it out. See where you go with that one. All right. Well, I don't know how you would fund such an effort, but maybe someone listening to the show has millions of dollars to spend, and rather than donating it to me, just go ahead and do that instead. And we'll all have a good time and enjoy it. All right. Let's see. A couple of other things still hanging out there that I don't think we'll be able to shoehorn in. But, man, there's a lot. And maybe I could assign it to you as reading on your own. I'll read this interesting tweet thread from the other day that I put aside. I'll just make the leap over to this one. David Rothkopf. We've called his name a couple of times before, and he's got an interesting and somewhat lengthy thread. We'll see what we can get through here. I'm in the middle, he says, of finishing up a book on the Trump presidency and how the courage and dedication of many career public servants and Trump political appointees kept us from much worse outcomes that Trump and his inner circle, I guess, were aiming for. This is true from immigration to COVID to Russia and Ukraine to elections. My thesis is based on 30 years of D.C. experiences and is that the vast majority of the people in most administrations are fundamentally good and genuinely seek to serve the American people and the country. But, I will tell you something, looking at what Trump wanted to do and often was rebuffed from doing, in retrospect is even more shocking than it was at the time, because, particularly in international affairs, there was a pattern. And maybe you'll recognize it. He actively wanted to pull the U.S. out of NATO. He actively attacked the alliance. He pushed a plan to pull the U.S. troops out of Europe. He pushed plans to pull U.S. troops out of Asia and the Pacific and out of the Middle East. He effectively sought to hand Syria to the control of the Russians and Russia's allies. He pulled out of arms deals that constrained the Russians. He pulled out of an Iran deal that constrained a key ally of Russia. He pulled out of multiple international organizations and sought to actively weaken the international order that had been created to contain our enemies and promote the rule of law internationally. He tried to block aid to Ukraine. You may remember that he was impeached for that. He pushed to stop holding Russia accountable for the 2016 election interference. He made it so hard for his staff to raise issues regarding being tough on Russia that they regularly simply bypassed him. And when they did take a tough stance, there was often hell to pay with the boss. He celebrated Putin publicly and privately. He offered out of his own mouth Putin talking points on key issues such as Crimea, quote, wanting to be Russian. Even if you did not know that Putin actively tried to help him be elected, as the intel community unanimously concluded, even if he did not surround himself with pro-Putin lackeys, even if his businesses were not swimming in Russian money, even if he did not try to block measures to make it harder for the government to stop Russian interference in 2018 and 2020, the record is clear and shocking. The pattern of behavior is undeniable. The consequences, were he to have succeeded in pursuing his agenda and some of his wild ideas through, would have been disastrous for the U.S. and spectacular for Vladimir Putin. And all this was before the first attempted coup in U.S. history. All this was before Trump tried to blow up the very foundations of America's system and our strength. And if you are a Trump supporter, you will have stopped reading long ago. The Russia hoax filter in your brain denying you again access to the facts. But if you look not just at what Trump did, but what he tried to do before he was stopped by good patriotic Americans, including many who he had appointed to high positions, and you will see that the core and the primary occupation of Trump when it came to foreign policy was to weaken the United States, to weaken our alliances, to weaken the international system, and to strengthen and often defend the position of Russia. Don't take it from me in this thread. Go read the facts. To me, as I finish this book, as familiar as I am with all of it, it is still shocking. And still relevant, still happening.
From networksradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, all good points and all good reminders. I don't feel like we ever forgot any of that. In case you did, and you haven't gotten that all back from listening to this show, stay tuned for Justice Putnam and the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next. He'll remind you all about it. With news from Russia, Ukraine, around the world, and everywhere in between.